you seen the uncut?
Yes.
Oh, my apologies. You do know what it is.
No, I didn't watch those.
That was a line that when Ganta's double, that very, very briefly is saying something in the courtroom, or no, it's when his lawyer, the bad guy, is like, oh, this guy, and the video leaks, and it's clearly not Ganta as we know him, but it's Ganta saying, oh, I just killed this girl because beep! And it's just, I thought, oh my god, well, it needed to be a really evil line. It needed to be something that would just make you go, oh, it needed to be something that, whether you believed Ganta really said it or not, you'd have to believe that at that point, whatever judge or jury he's in front of would throw the book at him, even at his age. And so I thought, it needs to be a really wretched, sociopathic, unimaginably disgusting line about something he would do that would make everyone go, take this kid away, kill him. Because otherwise, it's like, it would just seem kind of contrived, and so I had him say something, and I wrote different versions of it. There were safety versions, but there was the original. And then Joel McDonald, when he was directing the show, said, you don't have to give me alts anymore. I'm always going to go with your first choice because we can be dark on this show. And he's like, and I came in to record as Nagi, and he's like, I'd like to hear something. He played me the uninhibited version of that line that Greg delivered. And I'm like, oh my god, you actually used that line. That was totally, That's gratifying too as a writer when they actually go, wow, that is a horrible line you just wrote. Let's use it. That's a keeper. And it was fun too. It's uniquely gratifying because I'm a little antisocial myself. It's very gratifying to watch your show on broadcast television and know that half of it's being bleeped. I'm giving the network censors a workout. Very, very good. You.
Of all the characters that you've played, is there anyone that you would want to spend a day as?
Oh, there's a lot of them I would spend. There's a lot of them I have spent days as. They all kind of become a part of me in a way. That's why it's so hard for me to play the favorites game, because I'm psychotic, and all the characters I've played kind of become a permanent feature of my psyche in some ways, become an addition to this really loud and obnoxious family in my head. And so, and many of them are very fun, and I'm like, I'm actually, this is interesting, and all of you will be like, oh, but the truth is I'm actually very, very shy person. Whatever, no, it's not, it's just who I am, right? I know it's hard to believe, but the fact is what gets me out of my shell is having a character to play. So, it's not that it's disingenuous or untrue, but it's just I'm always acting in a sense. And when I'm in public or when I have to deal with people, as I frequently do, I enjoy it, but I can only do it through the filter of some conceived character in my head, which is strange. For any of you that have social phobias, I recommend acting. It's a wonderful therapy. It's how I found my voice. I had a debilitating stutter when I was a child, and didn't speak really until I was almost 10. 9 or 10, I think, and so I didn't speak a lot, but if we gave me a script to read from, or Shakespeare, or something like that, we found that the stutter would disappear. And so it's what made me want to pursue acting, because acting is sort of what gave me my voice to begin with, I suppose. I know, warm fuzzy. Curse more. Let's see, you there, next to the last person I asked. So I'm asking.
This is going completely different direction. I want to talk about My Bride's a Mermaid. I love your character, but in episode 20, you did a voice that I had to literally pause and cry laughing. It was fantastic.
You'll have to remind me what that is, because that's My Bride is a Mermaid is all a blur. I remember it, and I remember Papa, but I don't. What scene? Actors very rarely remember episode numbers. Huh?
The Moe scene. With you and John Swayze.
John Swayze was recorded first in that scene, and John Swayze is one of my all-time favorite actors. The man is a chameleon. He's been in literally, I think, he and Monica Rial share the distinction of being the most cast actors in North America in anime, because they both have such incredible ranges. I mean, Monica is known for her more high-pitched characters, but she's done hundreds of things that you wouldn't recognize her in. And the same is true for John Swayze. He is just, you'd never be able to pick him out of a vocal lineup unless you had studied his stuff for years. And I'm still trying to get my head around it. I love the man. He's amazingly funny. And he was recorded first, and let me just say, a lot of the things his character said to my character that I heard first time around were bombs he left for me, that were not actually in the finished script, because John likes to mess with me.
Do you remember how you did that voice?
God, no, I can't. I just remember being told you have to do it, and I'm like,
It's a very high pitch.
It's very high pitched, and you have to understand it's coming off of Papa's voice, which is more like Scar.
Yeah,
so every time he's talking, he's like, hey, what's going on? And suddenly it's like this, and I mean, they sped it up too. I mean, they did put some effect on it. You know, it wasn't all me, but God, My Bride is a Mermaid. What a funny, ridiculous show that was. I enjoyed the hell out of that show.
Terminator references.
Oh yeah, awesome. yeah, all the time on that show. Let's see, you again.
Yes, I noticed that most of your characters drink tea, either green tea or some European tea. Have you yourself tasted any of those too?
Oh yeah, all the time. I have a really good friend of mine up in New Hampshire who works at a tea shop and like has the really good stuff. I mean, like the alchemical stuff that's like, hey, this is like $300, and I'm like, oh, thank you, I love you. I make tea all the time. I really love black carrot, and green tea is really good for you. Yeah, I'm a tea drinker. It's very pretentious. I know. Anything with pinky out like this. I know Sebastian was never like, it was a shoe-in, really, let's face it. I walk in the door and they're like, oh yeah, this is you. I'm like, what? I'm in Tales and I'm drinking tea. This is just Tuesday for me.
And you can still wear it.
Why, what on earth do you think qualifies me to play this character? Ooh.
Not food.
Oh.
So, in your career as being like kind of a lead writer on a bunch of different animes and stuff, have you yourself ever been in contact with any of the like Japanese writers for any of these shows or for anything like that at all?
I've met a handful of seiyu, of course, at cons. In fact, just a couple of weeks ago, I had the great good pleasure of being in Hawaii and meeting Takahashi Hirko, who played Japan in Italia. And he was really fun, and because, you know, I spoke just enough Japanese to have him laugh at me. and the interpreter, who also happened to be my partner, was just going back and forth between us, and the two of us became fast friends. And I'm like, oh my god! And people kept asking him like, what do you think of the English dub? And I'm like over there going, oh shit. He's like, I like it. I'm like, oh my god. I've never met a seiyuu that I've shared a role with. Sadly, I've had the chance a couple times, but something has always happened at the last minute. But writers, I don't even know. On the state side of this business, it is not uncommon. Most writers in the business are also actors, or were at some time, because of the nature of dubbing is such a unique niche industry that John Bergmeyer, for example, the head writer of Funimation, will not consider you unless you've had experience in the booth, either as an actor or director or engineer, because you need to be familiar with the process and how technically intense it is, because you're working with pre-existing animation, which means timing, which means being able to work quickly, which means being able to hit the ground running when it comes to, you know, getting your script out the door. Like I said, 2 scripts a week. That's a hell of a thing to have to do. That's an hour of dialogue I write a week, an hour of continuous dialogue. So I wouldn't be able to do that as well as I could if I hadn't worn the actor's hat, the dub actor's hat, for as long as I did too. So on this side of the business in the States, it's rare that a writer isn't also an actor. That's not necessarily true in Japan, because in Japan it is prelay. They do the voices first, and the animators work around the vocal performances. So one does not necessarily have to have been in the booth as an actor to be able to write the sort of to write anime. In Japanese. Does that make sense? So I don't know that I've never met a seiyuu who is also a writer. I'm sure there are many, but I've never met them. Most of them are just exclusively voice actors, and writers are exclusively writers. And writers, and this is also true of those of us that are known as voice actors, we're known primarily as voice actors before we're known as writers. Writers tend to be very invisible, which I think is as it should be. I mean, if your scripts have done their jobs, it ought to be the performances you buttressed that ought to be remembered from that show, not necessarily the writing. The writer, I think, should fall into the background and be invisible, and the character should be what you remember. So I think it's right that the actors and their performances are what's associated most with this particular show before the writing. So that said, I think writers in Japan, if they're not also actors, there's no venue for them. I mean, like, people aren't eager to go to a script writers convention. I mean, they just don't happen, as far as I know. It's a shame. I think it'd be really interesting, but it's just people just are more into the more visible aspects of it. They want the personalities behind the characters rather than the writers. Writers also tend to be very shy and tend to be very. I mean, it's often what led them to writing, because that's, you know, they can sort of mask themselves in words and you know, talk with people in their head rather than in real life. I think writers tend to be a very introverted lot. And that, I think it brings out the best in them as writers sometimes. So writers very secretive in the shadows. I've never met one. Not one. I would love to. I'd love to sit and talk with one, but I honestly think it would be probably the most boring and awkward conversation. You get two writers together and we're like, hi.
The tea again.
Right, the tea. Right, always the tea. I saw a hand fly up over there again. Yes. Oh no, you and then you again. So we'll do that.
Since you just mentioned Scar, I mean, to me, like compared to Isaac or Kiriko, for me it was a very stark contrast to your roles. What was it like to play a character like that?
Oh my God! Well, first of all, I'm a huge fan of the Full Metal Alchemist franchise, and it's but it wrapped. I mean, it's an extraordinary show. And that dub, by the way, was one of the best dubs ever. In many of our minds, was one of the dub that kind of changed the game for a lot of us actors. We thought, my God, this is. Mike McFarlane's work as a director on that show proved that dubs can be every bit as good and engaging as the original Japanese for English-speaking audiences. And but the original series wrapped before I became an actor, so I never had a chance to work on it, sadly. I did, however, have the chance to play like Soldier B or something in the film Conqueror of Shambhala, and that was a joyous occasion for me, being like all of 2 seconds on screen, going stop, freeze, and then getting shot and dying. And I'm like, I've been part of Full Metal Alchemist, holy shit! And then fast forward like 5 or 6 years, and when Brotherhood came down the wire, Mike McFarlane approached me, and by then I'd worked with Mike many times on many things, and he was a dear friend of mine, and he said, listen, Damien Clark, who was the first English Scar, couldn't reprise the role because of various obligations in LA. Would you be interested in taking up the mantle of Scar? I mean, it's kind of a different version of Scar, so we've got some wiggle room. You don't have to voice match Damien because it's a retelling. And I'm like, thank God, because I don't want to voice match Damien. I think that would be terrible, and I'm not the person for that. I'm not a good voice matcher. It's not that I don't believe in it necessarily. Sometimes it's very, very good quality to have. I am not a voice matcher. I'm not an impersonator. But so. When he said, do you want to play Scar? I'm like, holy God, yes, absolutely, holy shit, yes. And getting to play Scar, which is, just this great, intense character, was the sort of noble adversary that is so much fun to play. I've always been compelled by those kind of characters for various reasons, but it's the concept of a villain who's not entirely hateable because you get where he's coming from, or her. And so my first day of recording on that show, my very first line as Scar, and that voice is very difficult for me. It's hard to do. I could only do it in small bursts, and Mike was very careful, like only scheduling me for 2-3 hours at a stretch, because more than that it would ruin your voice for several days. Because it does not sit comfortably anywhere, and there's so much grit in it that that is a hard thing to say. Grit in it. That's a tongue twister for all of us.
It's even harder, like the fight scenes.
Even harder because it's that voice times 10, So, but Mike is really an intense and really brilliant director to work with. He's always pushed me out of my comfort zone as a vocal act, as a vocal performer, and is always, and because of it, I find new areas of my range that I never suspected existed before. So I have Mike to thank for a lot of things. But chiefly the experience of my first line as Scar, when I said, I think the line is, "For we shall turn their backs on the ways of God shall be punished," followed by, because that was, I'm like, oh my God, Mike is like, what the hell was that? I'm like, sorry, let's do this. and like giggling like a schoolgirl after every take, because I'm playing Scar in Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, holy shit. But thank you, it was a very, very weird technique that we would use to get that voice to. Mike was very good at this. He would straddle me and punch me in the throat repeatedly, light me on fire, and it was great. But thank you. And now I said I'd go to you, yes.
Thank you. What's your background? I mean, what was your educational background in your before you started doing what you're doing now?
I dropped out of a lot of schools. Yes, kids, stay in school. No, the truth was, well, here, a true story. So I grew up on the stage, so to speak. Once we found my voice, as I talked about earlier, I was on stage all the time. I loved it. I I came out of my shell. I performed all the time with community theater schools. I went all over the place. I loved it. Absolutely loved it. But when the time came to pick a profession, to pick a career, like what school do I want to go to, I decided, I realized I had never really thought about being an actor professionally. That this was just something I was going to, it was going to be a childhood thing that I put to bed once I grew up. And so when the time came to pick schools, I didn't go to acting school. I went to music conservatory because music was my other secret passion. I played classical piano since I was 6 years old, and I got a scholarship to a conservatory to play. It wasn't Juilliard, nothing fancy like that. It was in Oklahoma. So, as Troy Baker likes to say, your choice was either milk a cow or play piano. So I went to conservatory fully thinking that I would be some great recital pianist or whatever, or composer and blah 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 blah, and just did not mesh with the conservatory environment. Hated it, in fact. And it was very specific. It's what's called a pedagogy school, where you go to, which is a big word for a school that will reduce you to a husk. Pedagogy school is where you go to learn to perform and also to teach performance. And so I went, and I just hated it. There was a lot going on in my life at the time that the timing was bad, the atmosphere was not for me, and I decided to drop out. And from that point, I went kind of just willy-nilly. I had a lot of different jobs. I didn't really have a career to speak of. I did go back to college and study theater, but I never got a degree. I just did it in my spare time and stuff. And it was a decent living, but I just never felt married to the work. There was no passion in it. It was not fulfilling. It was just a paycheck to paycheck kind of job. And so I found voice acting, or it found me rather, because Chris Bevins, the gentleman whose name I mentioned earlier, is also a director for Funimation, has been for many, many years, since the Dragon Ball days, in fact. And he was a friend of mine. I knew him through various people, just various circles that we ran with, and he knew me. We were comic book nerds together primarily. I knew what he did for a living. I thought it was really cool because I was an anime fan, but I never ever had any designs on, oh, I want to be an actor. You know, my voice is, I just never thought about it. I was a marketer, and that's what I did, and I was being an adult, which means I was unhappy in life, and that's my responsibility. Hate my job and my life. Yay. So I one day get a call from him. I get a call from him one afternoon out of the blue, and he says, I'm working on this show called Samurai 7, based on Akira Kurosawa's Seven Samurai, which happens to be one of my favorite films of all time. And he said, I have this character that none of the usual suspects are working on. I'd love for you to come in and just give me a read. And I'm like, oh my God, are you serious? No. I mean, I was terrified of the idea. I was like, I haven't acted in almost a decade, and I certainly had no. Thank you. I had no experience on mic. All my experience was stage, so I thought, no, it's going to be a waste of time. Well, he did not take no for an answer, so he kept calling me every day for 2 weeks, saying, and he went from laid back, wonderful, warm Chris Bevins to scary gangster, I'm going to break your fucking kneecaps in 2 weeks. And so I finally relented. And he made up some horrible story about, like, look, you're not going to get the part, okay? I just have to get some new people to audition because the line producer is breathing down my neck about using the same people. So just come in, read. If you suck, it's better. We'll laugh. We'll never speak of it again. I just need a warm body, please. So I came in very reluctantly under protest. And it was a 4-hour-long audition, which I was not prepared for. I thought it would be like any stage audition where you come in for 5 minutes and blah, 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 do your thing, and then you're done. And then maybe they call you, maybe they don't. It was 4 hours where I was like learning how to read a dub script, which looks very different than, say, a stage play or a film script. They're just the formatting is different and the directions are different. And I had to learn all this code, so to speak. And then matching the flaps, so to speak, and having to emote and like really getting intense. I mean, it was boot camp. It was voice acting, dubbing boot camp. The Bevins style, which is a white knuckle ride through hell. And because he's an intense director, very intense. He's a great director, but he does not suffer fools gladly, and he will not let you relent. He knows you've got this in him, and he is going to squeeze blood from a rock. God damn it! So for 4 hours this goes on, and confident at the end of it when he says, okay, out of the booth, come and sign these NDAs. I'm confident I had sucked, and he would leave me the hell alone, and we could go back to being comic book nerds together, and he would just, please, let me go back to my miserable life. I'm not ready to be happy. I signed these NDAs. Well, I thought they were NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, so my first mistake, I didn't read them very closely. So I'm signing these away, and as I'm signing them, I say to him, I'm like, just glibly, I'm like, how the hell do you people get anything done in this business? It takes you 4 hours long to audition every single batch that comes in. He's like, oh, it doesn't. It took us 5 minutes. We've actually just recorded the first 6 episodes, and you just signed the contract, so you're an actor now. That is how I became an actor. Well, with that, I have to close it, so thank you.
Seriously.
That was with Yellow Devils.